this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And as we get ready to hop into the interview today with Divya, I just wanted to just tell you a little bit about her. So in this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Divya Vijay Pratheek. She's a seasoned biotechnology leader with over a decade of experience in product and commercial strategy. So with that, Divya, welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Don. Yeah, really happy to be here as well.
Yeah, it's very good. I mean, one of the things that I know I wanted to get into a little bit with you is, what on your LinkedIn profile, I think it says something like, "What the hell is product management?" Before we hop into that kind of your overall journey, I wanted to, just to hear a little bit more about what brought you to life sciences. What led you, first of all, to biotechnology, but then, also what led you down this path of commercial strategy too.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks. And when I realized I was going to be on this podcast, it made me think about it as well. And I think it was a mix of luck and serendipity, and there wasn't really any plan, which is probably not what you want to hear, but maybe I can just take you through it. So, you know, way back when, I think when I got done with high school, I thought, when I go to university, I want to do something biology related. I've always been, interested, at different times of my life, wanted to be a vet or wanted to be a marine biologist, save the dolphins, that sort of thing. When one's was naive and hopeful with a lot of energy. And so I went into studying zoology, chemistry, and microbiology at university for my bachelor's degree. And when I was, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say I think there was a bit of a romanticization of what it is to study it, right? And when you're actually doing it, you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of dissecting cockroaches and looking under a microscope, right? And I think then I realized that my personality is probably not best suited to it. So I started like getting distracted, as some of my professors would have probably said. And then I had, we did have an English class that I took as an elective, and one of the English and communications professors then said, have you thought about, doing something with communications, maybe, joining the debate team, maybe, something you want to do, because I was very active in those classes. And I did. And so after my bachelor's degree, which I did finish, because I was like, I started, so I'll finish. I did for a second, look around and think, microbiology or biotechnology or whatever, but decided to take a break from making that big decision and go into the workforce, maybe, figure out what this marketing thing was all about, this communication everyone's talking about. I got a little bit of, success doing a couple of internships with an event company, an advertising company, and eventually ended up at Accenture, which I think was my big break. So I got into the internal comms department there. At that time, and still, Accenture was huge in Bangalore. This is all in my hometown of Bangalore in India. And, that campus in Bangalore alone had thousands of people, and, India-wide had 50,000 people. And my job was to work with the internal comms team for all the programs they had going. And I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I thought, yeah, I think this is something I want to do. It had nothing to do with science, right? It's like working for consulting. But I think it was really good that early on in my career, I got to work in a big American corporate. So then you see how things are done efficiently, what those things mean. You're exposed to things like Six Sigma and, process and racing matrices, like way early in your career, which I think was good. Then after that, I said, okay, let's get a master's degree to formalize all these things that I learned, just on the go, right? And then I went and did my master's in communications in North Carolina State, also because my boyfriend was there at the time. So, it was, like I said, a lot of it was chance and combined. And then, of course, I married this man that I followed to the US. And then he said, I got a job in Germany. So do you want to head over? So then when I just got to the US, but at least got to finish my master's degree, joined him in Germany. And I think in Germany is where after my master's degree, I sat down and said, now what do I want to do with this? What do I want to do with a bachelor's in microbiology, a master's in science, a master's in communication sciences, um, and not faffing around about, your career anymore, right? It was about 28. I'm like, now's the time to like make some decisions that, that are more well thought of. Um, and that is when I applied at QIAGEN, because I saw there was a job opening there for a marketing specialist, and they were looking for someone with a science background and a marketing background. And I was just in Germany for about 3 months then, so my German was very basic. So also the job was in English, which helped me. And then I think the rest is history. So I got in, and then once I got in there, it was like a match made in heaven, right? Because I got to marry both sides of that, my personality, I think, and an interest in science always, but not to the level that maybe someone digs so deep into it that they get a PhD and a postdoc and go that way, right? So there are alternative ways to work in science, I think, which is what my career might show, and what I try to tell people. Yeah, it worked out, and from there I ended up here. Now I've been here for 10 years in this space, and I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, I feel like consulting teaches you a couple of really critical things, and it probably early on in your career, was beneficial as well, just to have, one the ability to sort of pull together your thoughts in terms of presentation and have that presentation more or less walk and talk to a customer. And then
Hmm.
secondly, critical thinking, I feel like, very much as a consulting thing that you have to really take that outsider's perspective and critically think on your feet. Um, and then just the overall sort of ability to task switch as well. Cause I mean, I just feel like there's a level of, just I guess a difference of having the ability to just focus on one organization and one set of things is a benefit, to some people, but at the same time, getting your brain to say, you know what, in the morning I've got to think about this organization and this client that I'm working with, and in the afternoon I've got to sort of switch over and take somebody, at a different point. Do you feel the same?
I would say absolutely. Now when I think about it, I was in Accenture 2006. Wow, I'm old. So it was almost 20 years ago. Like I said, I just finished university. And I think back then I was so junior there, if that makes sense, right? I probably didn't appreciate it like I might have now, right? Back then you're so intimidated by this large organization. You're just out of university, you've studied science, but you hear things, right? Like you said, very rightly so, you pick up things. And another thing I'd like to add to what you said is when you work for a large organization, and the difference I've seen, being in startup now and, starting with these large German American corporates is you learn the value of efficiency, if
Mm.
that makes sense. No one has time for fast. Meetings are money, time is money. Like you said, how do you present? How do you walk that talk? How do you instill confidence in others? Right. And then I think one of the things we'll probably touch on here is things that you learn through your journey and stuff. And I think that's one very big thing that I take out of a lot of the large organizational, the value in working in a place like that, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, your statement at the very end is something that ties very closely to where we're going to next in the next question, which is, what are some of the significant challenges that you faced early in your career, and how did you overcome them?
And I think this is something people talk about a lot, right? But I think imposter syndrome, I think that's something that, that is gone with me a lot because of course I had it at Accenture because, I was the only person there who didn't come out of a communication degree or an engineering degree, right? I had a microbiology degree and honestly met someone. Accenture was the client of the advertising company that I was working with way, way early. And then, I started having a chat to someone there. And they said, we have a couple of openings you can try. And then, it worked out. Um, but I think a lot of imposter syndrome when I came to Germany, being a woman of color who again was not German, making it in a big biotech company like QIAGEN, right? That was also hard. And I think then you move to startup, which I did, and then you go, whoa, like I'm not from the startup world. Like I'm from big organization world. Like how am I going to do this? And I think what you realize then is overcoming imposter syndrome. A lot of it is sometimes just fake it till you make it. I know that's awful, right? But I think when your mind sort of follows your body, if that makes sense. It's a sort of, you tell yourself you can do this. You instill a sense of confidence in the people around you. And I think then you start believing that, I actually can do this. Like, the decisions that I've taken, they've made sense, or people appreciate the value that I bring. And I would say to anyone that has imposter syndrome, the best advice that I got from a colleague very early on was, if you have it, that means you realize that you have room to improve. And you realize that, there are things that I could do to make this better. You're not coming into it with arrogance. And so if anyone tells me my team they have imposter syndrome, I say, well, I think that's actually a good thing, because I think then you're very open to suggestion and improvement.
Yeah, I agree. I think I, I often tell this story as well here, that one of the things that led to this podcast was not necessarily imposter syndrome, but my fear of essentially becoming a consultant during COVID, and then winding up being a person sitting in a room by himself, looking for his next opportunity. And not connecting with kind of the broader audience, and losing skill set, losing some of the muscle that I had already, right? And so I was terrified that, look, I could actually slip backwards if I don't stay connected to the larger life sciences community. And so this podcast kind of, was my way of solving that problem. And I kind of, liken that back to like what you were just saying, right? You throughout your career, you wind up with let's just say like a bin of skills that you collect along the way. And hopefully, that bin leads to something that, is a passion of yours, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it really well.
So how did your roles at like QIAGEN, is it Automata? Is that the name of the company?
Automata.
And then Congencia?
Congenica.
Okay, thank you. How did they shape your approach to managing global product portfolios and growth strategies?
Yeah. See, I come back to this. My career started out very quickly. It started off with big corporate, right? So I started off, I think, thinking a certain way, working a certain way, like I said before, racy matrices, what's the most efficient way? I think, especially coming out of QIAGEN, right? It is, and working in Germany, there is a certain way to do it. And a certain way to do things, structures are already set up. And then I think so I did that, like I said, I did that, was it QIAGEN for about 8.5 years. And then we moved to the UK again, because my husband's like, oh, now I got a job in the UK. What do you think? so I moved with QIAGEN to Manchester in the UK, which is where I am now, and hopefully we'll stay for a while. So when I moved here, I thought, okay, I've been at QIAGEN long enough, right? And at a certain time, people stay for a long time, and that's fine. But you do start feeling like a bit of a cog in a wheel, if that makes sense, as part of a larger organization, and as the organization gets larger as well. And then I said, hey, the UK is really like a hotbed for startups, right? Mm-hmm. Cambridge, Manchester, Oxford, London. There's a lot going on here. And sort of put myself out there and said, I've been at QIAGEN for a while, long enough. Like, I feel like I've gotten a good set of skills, and I've, managed good portfolios. And so how about move to startup and try and take all the things that I've learned in a smaller organization, right? And I think, if I could say selfishly, also to want to be, big fish in a small sea, right? And so I took that jump with Congenica. When a recruiter reached out to me, I was like, yeah, let's do this, right? And I think Congenica is one of the harder changes I had to make in mindset, because from an organization of 5,000 people, you move to one that's less than 200. and you come wanting to make this big change because you're like, I know I have all these product frameworks, I have all these slides ready, we're going to do this, and this, right? And they're like, whoa, hold on. But no. Right? You're a couple of steps behind. And then I think you have to realize not everything that works for a large corporate would work for a startup, even though you want to take those lessons learned and come. Congenica made me realize I have to tweak it, if that makes sense, to to fit the the strategy and the situation of a company as it was at that time, right? Which is, you would see these ABC. What are you doing? What do you want? Are you post-revenue, pre-revenue? I've never thought of those questions at QIAGEN because it's always revenue, 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 and you're not thinking about, am I going to do the next raise or what do the investors think? So I think Congenica was a good starting point. I would say the same for Automata. It was that okay, now I learned these lessons at Congenica, and then how do I make sure that I've applied those to what the company wants right now? But I would be honest to say that Ribbon Bio is actually where I think I finally found my feet, if that makes sense. And my ability to take all the lessons I learned through all of my career thus far, and then put it into practice. So I would say the biggest lesson is when you're coming from a large organization into a small organization or make a change, don't try and make too much of a change too quickly, right? I know we want to prove ourselves, and especially when you have imposter syndrome, you're like, oh, look at all the value that I bring. But slow, steady, understand what people want first, understand how your experience and strengths align, and then come together and set something up in a strategy that makes sense for that company. And I think that was the biggest mind shift that I needed to have coming from a large organization to startup.
Yeah, I think it's the big sort of recognition that I've had a couple of times. I mean, so I've worked in startups a couple of different times, kind of on and off throughout my career, very early in my career. And then, also, more recently. And it's kind of an interesting point because you sort of have to like meet the organization first where it is, like wherever it is. You can't just like you said, walk in and say, hey, look, I'm gonna from an operations perspective, hey, look, let's put in Lean and Six Sigma and all of the rigor and all the process that comes with that. And we're just going to sort of bring the organization to a halt because of the fact that we've got all this stuff. And instead, you have to sort of say, where's the organization today and how do I, meet it, but then also leverage the skills and capabilities that I do bring to kind of bring them along, right? Because, I often have said this as well, that, the big organizations, what they show you is like what that structure and capability bring. And it's scalability and the ability that, hey, look, they can meet a lot of issues in the field as well. So yeah, I just feel like there's that, you have to kind of have that ability to kind of, switch your vision a little bit and say, hey, look, I instead of bringing everything that I possibly can, I'm going to kind of, switch down just a little bit to give them the capability to kind of catch up to where I think they should be. And so, yeah, does that help?
No, 100%. And I think, the things that you pick up, like exactly like you said, Six Sigma and Lean and, all of those things in your frameworks, you can pick those up from the large organizations. And I think everyone should work in a large organization at some point in their life. I know some people are like, oh, I'm just made for startup or whatever. I think you learn really good lessons there, right? And also, management of different levels and, how things are set up. But then when you join a startup, I think you also need to realize and fall in love with the chaos, right? And then say, there's some method in this madness. I'm gonna bring some structure to it, but slowly. And then you also learn to understand, how maybe things are done in a more agile way. Things are done, with fewer stakeholders. There's more risks that are taken. You get more creative solutions, and I think you just need to lean into that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So can you talk about any specific projects or accomplishments that you're particularly proud of in your career?
Yeah. And I think like I said, the little voice inside me that's like saying, you're an imposter is like, oh, he's probably not going to think that's cool. No, but I think for me, it has to be what we've done at Ribbon. And I would say, this is also the new leadership team that was set up. So the story of Ribbon was actually kind of, it was kind of insane. It was the smallest company I've ever been in. And when when I was ready to join, and I was talking to Jody Barrientos, who's the CEO of Ribbon now, he was like, "Are you sure you want to do this? We're a small company. You're used to maybe working in larger companies and some startup. Um, we have an excellent technical idea, right? That's where we are. We know this technology works. We know early access customers love it. It needs to get productized and commercialized, right?" And you're like, yeah, how hard is that to do? We can do it. I did it for such big companies. I can do it for a 50% company. It's gonna be great. But it was hard. It was hard. It's hard to go, um, this is a great product. It's fantastic. It's not, like I said, there's no product yet. Actually, let me rephrase. This is a great technology, right? Where's your product market fit? Right?
Mhm.
How are you based competitively? What is our pricing strategy? What is our marketing strategy? And this is how I always explain it. Like I literally had to go in and we had to establish a product function where it didn't exist. And you have brilliant scientists, right? That have created this fantastic technology, and you're working with them. And they're also keen as well, because obviously everyone wants to make revenue. We want to make this happen. But then you come in and you set up a commercial and product function from scratch. I think that's been honestly one of the most gratifying experiences that I've had. And we're here and we're ready to launch our product at SynBio Beta. And it's been almost 2 years to get there. And everything, setting up an MVP, setting up, pricing matrices, right? Like really from scratch. And it's been great. It's been absolutely fantastic. And it's almost like our baby now, right? Because it's like we've done this from the beginning. Just can't wait for the world to see the product that we have to launch.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also would like to know, how do you communicate complex biotechnology concepts to a broader audience, especially whenever you're thinking about that commercial context that you have to put things into?
I was thinking about this question. I actually need complex concepts explained to me first. So I think, and this is what, this, honestly, I'm reminded of this every day. I left studying formal biology when I was 20, right? And you
Mhm.
graduate out of university, bachelor's degree. And I didn't keep up with it because then I moved into a completely different space. And of course, then at QIAGEN you joined, but then, I was a product manager for automation. And then you're so, siloed in what you know and what you learn. When I came to Ribbon, I was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Yes, synthetic DNA is great. Yes, it's long, it's complex, and, it's extremely accurate. What do you do with something like this, right? And first is to have that broken down to you, I think. And when you need something complex explained to you, another big lesson I learned quite early on, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't understand this, explain it to me. No, make it dumber, right? Explain like I'm 5. I think that's one of the things I think didn't, and I'm probably misquoting this or misremembering this, but didn't Richard Feynman say, you only truly understand something if you can explain it to a 6-year-old or, something like that. So it's like, explain it to me in the simplest terms possible. And even when I set up teams, I usually hire for someone who's very technically capable, even in product and marketing teams, because I think we need someone like that to also be that liaison between technical and product and marketing and, bring those complex ideas to us. Am I okay? Maybe rephrase the question you asked me. Sorry, Don.
Sure.
You
Yeah, that's
asked me
fine.
the question and I'm rephrasing it.
Yeah.
I think I see it a different way because what tends to happen is in our field, we're selling to other scientists. So they
Mhm.
already know sometimes their work is more complex than the solution that we offer, or it fits into their larger workflows and their larger, scientific aims or goals, that we sort of don't understand their complexity, if that makes sense, right? And they know exactly what they want when they come and ask for a product is I think is niche or as specific as something that we can offer. So I find that very often it's different. It's not how do you break down scientific concepts, it's how would you communicate the benefits and outcomes of what your product can do rather than just sell a feature set. And
Hmm.
that's something I think my team is sick of listening to when we make marketing material or when we talk about it. I'm like, I don't care about the features. Give me the benefits, right?
Hmm.
I think this is also something I probably picked up in one of these articles or listicles, right? Where you think, oh, that's actually really cool. And then it sticks with you. Um, is when they said when you're selling someone an iPod, you don't say, oh, it's these many gigahertz and da 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 da. You say it's 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? That's how Apple did it to make people understand and to make it accessible. So for me, it's always these guys are smarter than us. They know why they're buying it. They understand the complexity of it. But always sell benefits, don't sell features. I think, and it's not easy. It's not easy to do, but it's something that you have to learn to do. I think to be successful um, in marketing and in product in this field, especially when you're selling to scientists.
Yeah, because you especially need to understand from the lens of your ideal client, right? What is their pain, and
Yep.
how am I sort of meeting that, right? To use the iPod example, right? I mean, all of us were at the time, using CDs and having CD players, at the time, that could only
Right.
hold 20 songs at max or 30 songs at max, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, you can take 1,000 songs with you on your trip, and you can decide, do you want to listen to an audiobook, or do you want to do whatever. I mean, all of a sudden, in biology as well, I feel like it's the same thing. It's You have to kind of think about, what sort of place am I meeting my customer at, and what will this technology do or enable for them that they didn't have before. So yeah, it is a tougher landscape, especially from a scientific perspective, I would imagine.
And when you have scientists selling to scientists, I think very often what happens is does this thing happen, right? Like Ribbon wants to talk about all the things that the DNA can do and how accurate it is and how complex it is. And you start going down that rabbit hole and you're like, no, no, stop, stop, stop. Scientists are people too. And, believe you me, because I've married one, they have feelings too sometimes. And so what they like is they also want you to appeal to an emotional you know sense. If that it's not, you don't have to feature sell them. And if they want to be feature sold to and start asking you questions, sure. But I think your larger marketing message and product positioning need, I really believe that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just said that earlier this week to somebody. It was they were trying to use logic to convince somebody, and I just said, look, I mean, we all know that more of us are inclined to buy based on emotion than we are based on logic. So the story could be 80 to 90%, based on emotion, and then the other smaller percentage we could use some logic to sort of tell the story, but let's not get locked into this logic box, because then we'll wind up with no clients for their business. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation to have as well, because I felt like we were going right down this path of here are all of the 100 logical reasons why you should buy this particular product from somebody. So it was an interesting conversation from my side as well, because I was just like, I don't know. I don't know who's going to buy this, because, it logically makes sense to me, but I know at the end of the day, we need to sort of tie back to the pain and the place that people are, and why would they buy your product because of that.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. How does it solve the that they have?
Mm-hmm.
um yeah.
Yeah. So, what is the current focus of your work? This is where I'd love to get back to what the hell is product management, and try and understand a little bit more about what it is that you do, and how is it that you're helping Ribbon Bio?
Can you hear me? Sorry, Don. I think
I
I
can
lost
hear
you
you.
for a
Yep,
second.
yeah. Did
Am I
I
back
lose
on?
you? Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay, great.
Just for one
Um,
sec. No, we're back on. We're back on.
okay.
Did you ask me what is product management, and
Yes.
how I would define it if I
W-
understood that?
Yes.
Um, Sorry, go
You
ahead.
could start there. We could start there. Yep.
Um, yeah, funny story about that. It's just macabre, that story of how I got that. It's like I was just watching one of these shows, right? Like FBI, CSI type shows. This one was based in Australia. And I think one of the women that got murdered was a product manager. And then the lead detective looks up and says, "What the hell is a product manager anyway?" And I was like, yes. No one would, if I ever got murdered, no one would understand what I do. I don't even think my husband understands it, to be fair. But this is the way that I would define product management, and what it means to me. Let's put it that way. So I think you hear a lot of this stuff like, oh, the product manager is the CEO of the product, and all of that fluffy stuff. But I think for me, the product manager is someone that marries the technical aspects of a product to a market need, right? And then create something that the market wants to buy. This is how I would define it, right? And I'd say a product manager probably wears two hats. You have a product development hat, or, during the phase of product development, and then you have a product marketing hat. Usually, most product managers should be able to wear both. And I think, we talked earlier about code switching, and then, knowing when to put which hat on. And one is where you then take a really good technology, like I mentioned, where Ribbon was. In the last 2 years of Ribbon, we've been in a very heavy product development cycle, right? Where you have a fantastic technology. And then the question is, how do I productize it? And what does that mean? And this is how I explain a complex, it's not complex, but uh, somewhat the way I would define it is, let's say you made, a fantastic electric battery, right? In your, I don't know, in your mom shed or whatever. And you talk to a couple of friends, and you know that this battery is even better than, what they put in the cars now, or whatever, doesn't matter, right? And you then think, you get enough money, you get seed money, you develop it, you come to a point where it's stable, right? And then you want to sell it to someone. But the question is, whom are you selling it to? And these are the kinds of questions I also think, CEOs and young companies or startup companies that are, early on in their career, as they're looking for, capital, and they're looking for money to grow, very often I find they don't ask this question. So I have this great tech. I'm not going to force it into a market. How do I make sure I have the right market for it? Right. So, am I now making this battery for a big SUV? Am I making it for a family car? Am I making it for a car in a tiny city? Am I solving the problem of an electric scooter maybe? Or am I putting it in a little motorbike and selling it to the developing world maybe? So the question is, what are you going to use it for? You can't use it for everything, obviously, because you're not a big enough company that you can do that. And I think this is when you bring in someone that understands product and product market fit, right? And says, this is how the market is for this kind of vehicle. This is how the market is for this kind of. How do we scale this based on how much it's going to cost us to produce it and what the cogs are? How much of a profit margin do we need to make? Do we even need to make a profit margin in the first couple of years? Or can they wait for maybe for a CDC type thing where we actually have to show revenue? And I think these are the kinds of questions you need to ask and say, based on all these things, who's our first market, right? Maybe it's that, I don't know, a small household with one kid, but they're extremely environmentally conscious and they're ready to look for their new car. This is someone that we should be talking to. And these are the car companies that focus on these kinds of families. It starts becoming very niche, but you have to know your audience, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. And I think a truly good product leader with commercial acumen can bring that focus. And that's what I would call it, right? Can bring that focus to a technology and productize it. Because then you say, now I found my product market fit. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to take this great technology, I'm going to put it in a box, I'm going to make the box pretty, and I'm going to put a price tag on it. And I know exactly who I'm going to sell it to. So then I'm doing my product development bits, and then I put it on a shelf. And then I switch to my product marketing hat, where I was in bed for the last 2 years with development, tech guys, and now I focus to sales
Gotcha.
and customer success. And then I have to take it off the shelves. And then what I do is, how am I positioning my product? What messaging do I give sales? What training do I give them? How do I explain to them who wants it, what their problems are, objection handling, all of those things, right? So I think a good product manager needs to understand development process, but not get so much into it that they tell tech how to develop. That's not product's problem, right? That's tech's problem. But
Right.
then you give them an MVP, and you give them certain boundaries of, if you make this product like this is how much we can sell it for, right? Trust tech and have, I think, relationship building as well, right? You have multiple stakeholders when you work in product, and you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to shift from a tech brain to a commercial brain, and then basically be the conduit between tech and sales. Know at which points in the product life cycle do you pull on what relationships you have in the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
That was all
And
over the place, but hopefully I explained what product means to me.
no, I mean it's kind of funny because I mean in bigger companies, right? I mean you see product managers kind of walk this walk quite frequently because they'll be out with customers and sales. They'll be at, larger shows. They'll be, eventually, just kind of hanging out with the guys that are developing the product. I mean, you can kind of see this sort of thing with product managers inside of bigger companies, and in smaller companies, it's probably harder to see or understand it, but it may feel a bit like they're, you know, doing a lot of different things at different times. But at the same time, it's important to get kind of that, the voice of the customer and what exactly are they feeling, and then eventually leading back to feedback to the engineering teams to say, hey, look, the thing that you're most excited about is not the thing that the potential customer is. So we have to kind of shift this messaging a little bit. How do I tell this part of the story as well? Because they don't care about the 1 extra% that you can store in battery life, to use your same example. So
100%. And I say it's also, I often call it a negotiation, right? With tech and a negotiation with sales. So I think it goes both ways. So tech goes, like you said, I can make the battery run for 2 extra minutes and it's going to be great. And that's much better than our closest competitor. I'm like, yeah, but no one cares. Can you try and figure out how you can make it slightly cheaper, or, something like that, right? And I think you have to you have to have that relationship with tech. And then
mhm.
same thing with sales. They have one customer that's the loudest. That's like, can you actually make the battery run 2 minutes more? And I'm like, no, that one customer is not going to buy enough to justify like the tech development process, and the amount that we're going to have to you know uh, spend on that. So I think it's that balancing act that you have. And I think a good product manager will always have a set of frameworks. Again, I come back to
Mhm.
that, right? Because I love a good framework. So I think a good product manager will know, how do I balance? Is that one customer? Are they an outlier? Or, is this time now for me to do a quantitative survey? Or should I talk to 10 more customers in that space and see whether they're all saying the same thing, right? And I think you have to also learn how to use, that suite of tools that you have, right? Use sales to go out and meet customers, come back, learn how to do a good quantitative survey, use how to learn how to analyze your data, and then learn how to take all that voice of customer that you have. Voice of customer is not talking to 3 customers and saying, yeah, thanks for that, I went for a sales visit, bye. It's about taking what you learned from them, finding themes, breaking it down, seeing if there's a trend, you know, and then trickling that. I wouldn't, trickling is wrong. I would say translating that to requirements for development to build, right? And I think a really good product manager will be able to do that. That can be very useful for a startup. because I think very often startups, and yes, I work in one, and I absolutely enjoy it. But there is a little bit of, I would almost say, myopia, right? Because you're so involved in this product that you built, and very often the co-founders are part of the leadership team, right? And they go, "This is my baby, and I built this, and I built this to change the world. Why are you selling it to someone that's not the person that I built it?" And then you go, "Yeah, but we're a company now. We're a Series A raising a B or a B raising a C, and potential investors want to see revenue. And at a certain point, it's not a hobby anymore.
Mhm.
It starts becoming a company, right?" And I
Yeah.
think these are hard conversations someone in product and someone with a commercial mindset needs to have with someone to say, "I get it, but the guys that you don't want to sell to, they have a lot of money. So
Right.
they want and they have a need for what you're selling, right?" Um, yeah, I think those are some of the challenges you have in a role like this, to be fair.
Yeah. All good points, I think, as well for people to consider, because I've seen this in the extremely small companies as well, where people just can't seem to get out of the grant and paper writing phase, to lead to the focus of, okay, so yes, you can sustain where you're currently at as a 4-person company, if you want to continue to write grants and publish papers, that's fine. And if that's what you want as a life, that's fine. But it is also not a company. You're not going to commercialize a product around that. You're going to essentially stay an academic. And so, do you want to shift and find your product market fit and find the actual buyer and lead to something that actually could be very impactful on the world, which is what you set out to do in the
100%.
first place. So yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. You hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Yeah. So, can we talk a little bit about the overall biotechnology sector, and how do you see it evolving over the next 10 years, and what role do you envision Ribbon playing in this evolution?
Yeah, that's also a fantastic question. I think the possibilities are endless. Absolutely. This is what makes me so excited to be in this field, I think, because when I joined Ribbon, right? What can you do with synthetic DNA? Anything, which is what we're finding, when you talk to our customers. You have companies that are now, a lot of, synthetic biology companies are working with big pharma, and you're talking about personalized therapies for cancer. Like, can you imagine that, right? I mean, it's just mind blowing. And if I can share, personally, I lost my mom to cancer. She had ovarian cancer, passed at 66. And I think immune therapies were at their infancy at the time that she, they did it, tried, didn't work. But I'm thinking every year you have something that gets better there. So for me, I think personally, the impact that it could have on something like that blows my mind. The other thing is, and I keep talking about this, again, we talk about, science education. For me, one of the biggest things I see is the impact that biotechnology can have on the environment, the
Mm,
planet, right? People are so afraid of things like GMOs. But when you think about it, when you have genetically modified crops, my God, it makes me blows my mind. You have things like golden rice, and you can help so many people in, maybe also my background, having lived in India for a significant portion of my life. And, that's my heritage. Um, if you can make rice richer in, things like vitamins or, essential nutrients that children need in societies where they largely eat rice as a staple food, I mean, that's crazy, right? And even things like rewilding, you have Colossal that's talking about bringing back the dire wolf that was everywhere. They're looking to bring back the woolly mammoth. Um, eh, for me, I think, and this is sometimes my husband says I'm silly. I get more excited about the woolly mammoth and what you can do with tomatoes and rice than maybe like curing cancer. But like I said, it's all over, right? It's this I think biology today is so much in its infancy, which we're learning from sequencing and things like we barely know what so much of the genome does, right?
mhm.
We barely know what secrets it holds. We barely understand the druggable parts of the genome, right? And with all these tools that you have, like AlphaFold and AI, and yes, everyone's talking about AI, and yes, is the hype about AI really, you know, is it really what, people are saying it's going to be? I think one should also view that with a little grain of salt and, a little bit of cynicism. But the potential for what it could be, right? In looking at new structures and what we could create, and having a synthetic biology company like Ribbon be a part of something like this, if that makes sense, right? If AI comes up with the kind of protein that would solve for something, and we could be a small part in maybe, synthesizing the DNA that codes for that, and helps do that, right? Sometimes I think at Ribbon we are, and this is another big thing, we don't come up with those solutions, right? We are not coming up with the next sequence that's going to cure cancer or mass produce the next vaccine, right? Think about that as well. Pandemic response, insane, right? The quicker we get to understanding how a pandemic works, how mutation works, how those things get mutated, the different strains that come out, AI can do that now, and then tell you what sequence of DNA to make to then make an mRNA vaccine. That blows my mind as well, right? We get quicker towards making a vaccine to respond to the next pandemic. I'm all over the place now because everything's exciting me about this. And I think we don't come up with those things, but we work with such brilliant scientists that have these solutions. And what they need from us is a small part of it. They need that synthetic DNA that they can't make, or maybe, other competitors can't make, or whatever. So they come to Ribbon and they say, make this for us. And we make it exactly as they want it, with the accuracy that they want. And then it's a part of something. It's a part of something that, like I said, pandemic response, curing cancer, bringing back an extinct species, potentially creating a kind of crop that could, I wouldn't say solve for world hunger, because that sounds like that's a lofty dream, but bring us one step closer towards solving some of the problems that, countries like, Asia have, or some parts of Asia have. Um, I know it sounds so silly and a bit cliche, but those are actually the things that wake me up in the morning and say, we're doing this towards a greater good. And you're not just saying that, but you believe that, because you know that that's where your customers are and that's what they're doing. Yeah. And that sometimes makes you feel very small, because you're like, there's so much happening and I'm such a small part of it, but also brings a lot of, I think, satisfaction to the job.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Don?
You did. You did. So, I mean, yeah. And I feel like, you touched on a lot of things, right? I mean, so to me, AI, definitely will have an impact, on the way that we think, and, might help to lead us down a path of, creating something that maybe we would have given up on, overall. I also think that, having broader minds to think not just about, the biotechnology sector from a pharmaceutical standpoint, but also, more largely, how does this touch, mankind, overall? And like you said, whether it's, bringing back extinct species, or helping food crops, I think, certainly are all, within the realm of things to overall, think about whenever you think about the future of where this could lead. So yes.
100%. Yeah.
So there's been somebody that's routinely been, joining us live, especially I think on Thursday mornings, and just kind of watching, these live recordings. And I added this question more or less because, it keeps coming up, overall. And so what advice would you give to somebody that's looking to get into biotechnology, today? So what would you say to them that, hey, look, here's my advice in terms of getting started?
I would say, one, don't think you have to go a certain path. Don't think you did your PhD and now all you need to do is go into an R&D job or a tech job, something like that. I think the possibilities are immense, right? Understand what your strengths are. And if you do feel like, and this, I have to give a shout out to someone named Lucas Leindecker, who is one of the technical product managers in my team. Started off as someone in R&D at Ribbon. And as he started, I think listening to the things we were talking about in town halls about product and commercial, he's an oncologist with a PhD postdoc, came up to me and said, hey, I feel like this is interesting. Do you have an opening in product? And I said, yes, we actually do. And I've been, wanting to look at someone quite technical. Come join us. And now he's one of the best product managers that, I've had the honor of maybe mentoring and developing. And I think he has a great future. So I'm like, do it. Grab the opportunity. Think that you can do what you want. You don't need to have, and this is another thing, you don't need to have a formal education in everything that you end up with, if that makes sense. A lot of product managers in biotech have a PhD. That's great. That's fine. But you need to have that commercial acumen. And like you said, the code switching, the understanding voice of customer, the, how you communicate across various stakeholders, those things start becoming very important. And I think your education will only take you so far, if that makes sense. And your educational qualifications will only take you so far. So, yep.
Yeah, you had said that you love a good framework, and I think, education certainly is filled with them. But I to your point, like, okay, so what is your practical application of the framework? Because if you can't think beyond the textbook and the framework, it's also not helpful either. So you have to get out of that academic world and come to the real world and say, this is how we apply this thing as well into our lives.
100%. Absolutely. I think that's really, yeah. And I think one of the best, pieces of advice that I got from one of my mentors at QIAGEN, Paul Outlinger, to give him a shout out as well, was, when you have imposter syndrome and you come into a workspace, right? Don't keep thinking these are all my weaknesses, and don't get obsessed with these are the things I have to overcome. And, these are the gaps I have to fill. No, sit down, take a step back and think, hey, what are my strengths? Why do people come to me, or what makes me who I am, or what's made me successful so far in the things that I've tried? Understand your strengths and then play to your strengths, if that makes sense, rather than getting obsessed with your weaknesses and convincing yourself that you're not good enough. And I think that's actually one of the best pieces of advice that I got that switched my mindset to, I'm only an individual contributor, to, no, I can actually be a leader in life science and be a leader in product, because I'm playing to my strengths. I'm playing to my ability to communicate. I'm playing to my ability to, like I said, manage stakeholders and, be a cheerleader and get people and find some, method in the madness. And then you're like, yeah, those are the things that are going to make me special, rather than me going, oh, I've kind of not studied that much biology. I should read all these textbooks, right? Which is where my head was at one point, because you're like struggling to keep up technically. You're like, wait, what am I doing? And then you keep beating yourself up because you feel like you're not good enough. And I think you should do that. Understand your strengths, play to them. Don't let them make you like get to your head and become arrogant or whatever, right? But believe in yourself. I think so many young people don't. And I'm like, do it. And if you see a job application out there, I get a lot of questions on Reddit and stuff. Sometimes, I'm on some of these subreddits on biotech jobs and things. Don't think, oh, I don't hit 90% of this job description, I'm not going to apply to it. Mate, apply to it if you hit 50%. Sometimes even 30%. If being a hiring manager, I know when I write down a list of requirements, they're like the unicorn person.
Yeah, right.
Unicorns are not people, but what I'm looking for, a unicorn.
Yeah.
And this is my wish list. But if you have 50% of what I'm looking for and show the ability and the need to want to learn and grow to fill the gap that you have, and like I said, play to your strengths, there's a place for you in a team somewhere. But do it.
Absolutely. So Divya, what inspires you?
I gave you a big speech about that already, Don. Fuzzy mice. No, I think the power of science. I'm completely a science-led person. I think, like I told you, I'm actually just coming to the end of my maternity leave. I just had a little boy 3 months ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's it. We're part of a lot of science-based parenting, advice websites and things. And I always think it's unbelievable. The amount that we don't know and the amount that we're looking to find out. and the tools that we have now to be able to do that. I can't wait for the next breakthrough. Like I said, I can't wait for the next, cancer drug to come out. I can't wait for the next animal that we save from extinction. I can't wait for us to make cows that fart less and, less methane or whatever, right? I'm like, the creative ways, and this is another thing. People shouldn't think that science is not a creative field.
Hmm.
It's fantastic. It is creative because you're coming up with innovative and creative ways to solve problems that the world is having, right? Try to cure hunger, try to make a mosquito that doesn't, transmit malaria or dengue or things like that. Those need creative minds. That needs creative vision and that needs innovation. And, the fact that I have a chance to work in a space where I interact with people like this or go to places like Symbio Beta and, these conferences and listen to the work that people are doing. Oh man, that inspires me. Definitely.
Very good. What concerns you?
Oh my gosh. And as I'm talking about all this, I'm like, I just had a little boy and I was like, what's the kind of world that we're going to leave him, right? Like, climate change, things like that, extinction, you hear about when you're in the space where you're talking about all the things that you can improve, you're also then very much exposed to all the things that are going wrong, right? And I think that definitely concerns me. It concerns me, what's the kind of world that we're going to leave to our children. But I'd like to think that we're going to bring these children up or the next generation up with the right set of skills to come up with those creative solutions that we're working on already, right? And hopefully AI can help with and accelerate those discoveries. You need to have hope though, even though there is concern.
Absolutely. Last question. What excites you?
I think it's that. I think is what is the next thing that we're going to come up with? What, how are we going to change something and drastically change the way we live and we work? And I'm just excited to see what that is. Every day is school day, right? Like you learn something new and you're so excited. And I think another thing is like cynical. Yes, I did say I'm cynical about certain things, but I would also tell people, big piece of advice would be keep your, be childlike, not childish, be childlike, keep your sense of wonder, keep your sense of asking why, what can I change? What can I do different? Because that's what makes us human. And I think that's what also fuels that creative and that innovative spirit to keep making a change, right? If everyone was just cynical and was like, oh, that's just how the world is. We're all going to crash and burn anyway. Well, nothing's going to happen, right?
Right.
I think we should all
in the
stay
next
excited.
pandemic because we wouldn't be looking forward enough to see it coming. So
exactly. So stay excited, stay creative, stay critical, but also, I think everyone should keep an open mind, like you said. And there's so much to look forward to, especially with science and all the breakthroughs. Yeah. Now I'm more excited. Thanks for asking me that question, Don.
For sure. Well, Divya, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. It was great to have you here. I loved hearing about Ribbon Bio, but also about what the hell is product management. So thank you for sharing all of that here. And
thank you for having me, Don. Thank you so much. Cheers.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.